I feel like we're doing a table read for a movie.
I know,
Yeah.
exactly.
There we go. All right. I'm going to say hello to your online audience.
Hi, everybody who's joining us.
Hi,
We're just
everyone.
going to give people a minute to join us, and then we'll start formally. So, Hannah, if you're trying to get onto the Wi-Fi, you could use either FCA private or FCA guest.
So Slido didn't ask for a password, so it just let me right in. Is that
Yeah, that's correct.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it's.
I thought you have to put in the numbers.
If you're using the link from the Facebook page, it should just let you go right in.
Say it again. Are you using FCA guest or FCA private, then it is Fernwood is great with capital F and capital G. Yeah. People are filtering in the theater here at the FCA, Paul Phillips Hall, and online. Let people get set up here for a second.
And then where do I go after that? Or just gonna do somebody else?
Then you're going to go to Slido, and you can find the link. If you're joining us remotely or in the room here, you can find the link from from my Facebook page is one place, or you can just go to the Slido website and type in the code, which is 918245. So we'll be on Slido and we'll be on YouTube. Give people about 30 more seconds. People are starting to join here.
Oh, great.
Okay, so maybe I'll introduce us and we can get started formally. So my name is Jeremy Caradonna, and sitting next to me is Nancy Powell, and off to the left, for those on YouTube, you can't see James McKenzie, but he'll be helping today with IT. And we are beaming to you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, today known as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, on whose traditional territories we live, work, play, and enact reconciliation. It's really my pleasure to be coming to you today from the traditional territories. And we are actually inside of the Fernwood Community Association hall called the Paul Phillips Hall. For those on YouTube, you can't see the people in the room, but there's people in the room here as well. And so thank you for joining us either in person or remotely. The idea for this session is to create a space for community engagement and for conversation and for some free-form thought about what the future of the school district looks like and the future of our school trustees. We're coming off a really difficult year in which there's been a budgetary shortfall and some pretty difficult budget cuts have occurred, specifically to music programs. My own daughter's strings program was cut, and my older daughter had her middle school band budget cut back by 20%. So these have affected me personally, but we're not here to talk about the personal, at least I'm not here to talk about the personal impacts. We're here to talk about the community impacts and what the school district might be doing differently in the future. So the idea today is not really to go down the rabbit's hole of what went wrong with the budget planning for this year or for last year. Unfortunately, the ship has sailed for some of the cuts that have happened. The idea rather today is to look ahead to what the future might hold and how we as a community can be demanding more and better from our school district and from our trustees, so that we don't find ourselves with these enormous budgetary shortfalls in the future where we have to make really difficult decisions and cut essential programs like counseling and janitorial and music and other programming. So the idea today is to solicit input and feedback and get a sense of where people are at and what they want in the future. And one idea that we had as an outcome, as a tangible outcome from this process today, is to create a questionnaire that can be shared with prospective trustee candidates, because of course we have a trustee election coming up in October. October 15th is not only the date of city council elections, but also school trustee elections. And if you're anything like me, you have voted for school trustees in the past, but often lacking real information about who you're voting for. And of course, there's no parties, which is a good thing, but there's often a lack of information about where people stand, what are their positions on things like the budget, how can people engage in a budgetary planning process that avoids getting into some of the issues that we've seen this year and last year. So that's kind of the outcome, the intended outcome of this process, is to create a questionnaire that would be shared with candidates and then maybe placed onto a website with the intention of increasing accountability and transparency. So I'm going to pass the mic over to co-facilitator Nancy Powell here in just a moment, but just want to make sure everyone has their tech in order. So for those joining us in the room and on YouTube, if you're at home right now, you should have two windows open. One will have this YouTube stream, and the other will have Slido. So you want to go to Slido website. You can either find the link on the Facebook event page or just go to the Slido webpage and type in the...
There's a link in the description on the YouTube.
Yeah, you can look in the description of the YouTube there as well. But if you haven't found it yet, the number is 918-245, and that'll get you right into our page. And so there'll be a series of questions, some of which are multiple choice polls, and some of them will be open-ended questions. And we'll give people a few minutes to answer and essentially filter and interpret this information and figure out how people are feeling and where we're going next. People in the room good with the tech? Yeah.
Okay.
Nancy?
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm really just here to help facilitate the questions and to talk us through this. So we're launching, the first question is, where are people tuning in from? So we're just curious where you're coming from, and your answers are anonymous, of course. We've got quite a lot coming in from Victoria City. We've got a few from Saanich. That's great. We'll just give a few more seconds. So far, we've got 57% from Victoria and 43% from Saanich. And we've got quite a few from other. We've got some West Shore logging in.
It's real-time data, folks.
It is. It is. That's great. So we've got quite a distribution of attendees today, which is wonderful.
Sounds like the tech is working for people too. The percentages change as more people fill out the questions.
Okay, so we're going to close that one and we're going to go to the second question. What is your connection to SD61? So we've got very strong answers on the parent, guardian, or caretaker with children, one or more children in the district. We've got some concerned local citizens, and we've got some staff and other as well. That's great.
And James, for those who are clicking other, is there an opportunity if they want to share more information about what the connection might be?
Absolutely. They can leave a comment in the chat. If they want to add more, they can always type it out there.
So I'm not sure if you heard that, but if you've clicked on other and you'd like to give us more information about your connection, you can always put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Enlarge.
Audience Q&A.
Audience
Which is under audience Q&A.
You can sort and list on top. The little triangle pointing down.
That one.
Back to the right.
That.
Yeah. Most recent. So, yeah.
Okay. So do you want to go through some of the?
Yeah, we can maybe go
So
through.
actually, we're getting some comments in on the chat. So we're just kind of keep you guys up to speed on that. So we've got one comment. Wouldn't it be better to have a fact sheet, especially on the incumbents, on how they voted on issues in the past? Good idea. There's also another comment coming in. Anyone can fill out a questionnaire. It's like a resume. You try to make yourself look as good as possible. That's definitely something to consider as we go forward.
I think those are really good points. I mean, that's the case also for MLA candidates and city council candidates. But I think the idea here would be to at least try to create some more public accountability. So if people are saying that they would vote one way on a topic and end up voting a different way, or they support this value and end up supporting different when they're in office, then at least we can start to track and have some accountability rather than where we're at now, which is kind of at zero.
And there's another comment coming in that says an effective questionnaire can be designed to support accountability and answers, and a fact sheet would maybe not apply to new candidates. So these are all very helpful. We're going to go switch over now to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to launch. What brought you to this event today? What brought you to this event today? So take a few minutes to answer that one.
Yeah. The fact sheet is a really interesting idea. I guess we would have to figure out who might be able to have the capacity to compile that information. The voting records are of course public, so I guess it would come down to someone just taking the time and going through and figuring out who has voted for what. Perhaps someone has already tracked that information. If someone knows of such a fact sheet, please let us know in the chat, because we're just maybe not aware of it. But that would be another very nice thing to place onto, say, a website in the future, especially if a current trustee is intending on running again in the future. Well, we could have some transparency about how they voted on things in the past.
That would be really helpful. So we're getting some answers in. What brought you to this event today? Concern about the loss of student programs. I want to be more informed in my voting in the upcoming election. I'm a parent of 2 students in SD61, supporting all action that helps us get school board trustees that represent parent interests. Some people are just curious.
Lots and lots of comments here.
Frustration with budget cut decisions. A lot of comments about really the whole voting in the trustees process, the election, the lack of transparency on candidates and how we can improve that going forward so that parents feel more comfortable. Frustration with budgetary decisions, and parents are wanting better representation.
One person here is saying, as a parent advocate, I'm interested in the trustee election and changing the makeup of the board. I'm a possible candidate. So that's really important for us to keep in mind here, Nancy, is that potential candidates might be joining us in the room or on YouTube, and which is really great because we want to see people stepping up and showing interest.
It is really great. And they'll be engaging with parents in the community. So that's really helpful. We have a disabled parent of disabled children who's very disillusioned by many years of deprioritizing their kids, looking for change. Another comment, disappointed with the last 3 years of school board decision-making and false claims of community engagement in that process.
Yeah, a lot of themes here emerging. I'm very concerned about the way in which the current school board is being run. There seems to be a disconnect between what the public wants in their schools and the actions the school board is taking. It appears that the cost of school board administration has ballooned in the last decade. That's a very interesting comment. And this is now impacting operational budgets to the detriment of student services and supports. So concerns that too much of the funding is going towards administration. What else are you seeing there?
I'm just saying we left our community school to a OL program in part because of issues with the district, particularly for children with special needs.
OL, online, is that an online program?
Online.
We left our community school to an online program in part because of issues with the district. Right, okay.
Would like to find trustees who are honorable and share good moral values, who listen to stakeholders. I think this whole concept of stakeholders is a really good one.
Yeah. I mean, it's sounding to me that the really strongest theme that's emerging is lack of democratic process, lack of transparency, lack of engagement, a feeling of disconnect. The word disconnect has come up in a few comments here. It's very interesting if we draw some parallels between how municipal politics are run, for instance, and a school board, because of course they're both publicly elected positions, but there's just vastly more engagement and transparency when it comes to municipal politics than it is for the school district. And one of the comments that I'm seeing here over and over in different forums is that people don't really know who they're voting for or what they're voting for. Maybe they have a vague sense, they've heard someone's name, but they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. And now we find ourselves with these budgetary shortfalls. Also hearing and seeing here that neighboring school districts are not dealing with the same kinds of budgetary shortfalls that we are. Why is SD61 constantly in this conundrum?
There's several comments about loss of the music program, transparency or lack thereof. I'm concerned about inflated admin salaries, looking for elected representatives who will not be working toward their own political gain, but rather for the students.
Yeah.
And I think, too, that the technology now provides an opportunity for way more transparency in the electoral process. So that's something that we can look at going forward, as well as how to use the technology platforms to create more transparency.
Yeah. And this is nonpartisan, of course, but voters should be informed about who and what they're voting for. Here's a comment: transparency or lack thereof. I'm also concerned are inflated admin salaries. Many current trustees never or rarely explain their rationale when voting on issues. I mean, for me, that also gets down to accountability, because accountability is explaining where you're coming from. So a lack of transparency and a feeling that what happens at the school district and within administration is behind closed doors.
And here's another one: wondering how we can vote in a better board in future. And I think that's really what we're here for today, is to try to start that dialogue.
Yeah, I've had a lot of comments on Facebook and by text and email asking for me to get involved in figuring out how we can forestall the budgetary cuts that have already been proposed. I don't have the capacity to do that. My sense is that the ship has sailed this year. I could be wrong about that, but at least for today, the idea is to look ahead and think about the next election and what we want from our school district and SD61 moving forward, rather than just looking backwards and trying to figure out how we can change what's gone on up until now.
These are very helpful comments. Should we go to the next one?
We're going to go to the next question.
Okay, in a sentence or two, please explain your main concerns with how the budget process unfolded in SD61 this year. So just take a few minutes, think through your main concerns with how everything unfolded in SD61 this year.
Yeah, and maybe think about how you'd like that to look differently in the future. Right, we will have to address that at some point.
So we've got an initial comment coming in, mostly concerned about Diane McNally and Rob Painter not getting a vote in this process. Another comment: how the trustees are supposed to be representing students and parents, and I felt they completely disregarded our input, regardless of how many emails, letters, or protests there were. It all felt predetermined. Despite being presented with options, they moved with the original proposal. Another comment: loss of funding for programs and services after last year's public outcry.
Yeah, for those who haven't followed along, I'm sure most everyone has, but Diane McNally and Rob Painter were suspended from the board. These are elected officials who are suspended. Again, we don't really have the capacity to solve that problem here today, but we can note per public media that the decision has been roundly criticized by unions, by parents, by local First Nations, and by other organizations. So that adds to this feeling of a lack of democratic process or questioning the process of the school district. And I think that the feeling was that the suspended board members might have been involved in crucial votes what necessarily would have been involved in crucial votes related to the budget.
And there's lots of comments coming in now. The government needs to fund inflationary cost pressures. Most district shortfalls are a result of government not funding properly these pressures. Another comment, we were told school lands had to be sold as there were so many shortfalls. Another comment here, the budget process was compressed. Stakeholders were not at the table. The budget committee was not democratic. Trustees were not responsive to feedback despite letters, protests, etc. Including parents and stakeholders in the budget process felt like tokenism, felt like they had already made their minds up.
Right. And actually, I'd like to just add a comment. I mean, if I were on Slido making a comment, this is my own personal opinion, but a few months ago on the Facebook page, I made a comment about how what I'm seeing in the process is a kind of classic manipulative democratic process where sort of absurdly large budgetary cuts are floated, and then there's a big reaction from the public, and then the school board comes back and says, okay, well, maybe you guys can give us a sense of what you want to be cut, right? And you sort of dump it onto the parents' lap and say, well, why don't you take ownership of what needs to be cut? But sort of manipulating people in the assumption that cuts have to happen. And then, in theory, the parents come back and say, well, okay, well, we can cut X, Y, and Z. And the school district says, okay, well, this was your idea. That's the kind of manipulative process that we often see when it comes to budgetary cuts at the public level. So I wanted people to be aware of that.
A few more comments coming in. I'm here because I'm so disappointed with the process. Not enough public representation. Let's see. Regards the current board, cannot trust their decisions or rationale. The outcome makes me uneasy. I feel that my voice, parent voices, are not heard. Clear communication and accountability seem to be lacking. I never felt clear on how these decisions were made, and then even further why and how some voted the way they did. Also with 2 trustees missing.
Right.
There was a clear lack of willingness to listen to students and parents. It felt predetermined.
Mm-hmm. So that's a real theme there.
Yeah.
Is it the process? I think someone used the word tokenism.
Stakeholders not being included in the process. There's not real consultation happening.
Let's keep going up towards
Yeah. So another comment, I participated in many of the engagement opportunities on the budget this year. And even though I have considerable experience running budgets, I found the process confusing. And it appeared that the budget options were predetermined and the engagement process played lip service to public input. The predominant feedback was that cuts should be kept away from direct impact to students, but that was largely ignored by the board in favor of proposals made by senior unelected district staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's there's a lot to unpack there, but also it looks like the feeling is that some of the essential decision making has been downloaded to staff when it should be in the hands of elected officials. I mean, is that how you're?
That's how I'm reading that.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of process related issues here. The process
Yes.
is broken, at least according to just about every comment we've seen so far.
And even though it seems everyone's frustrated because even though there was apparent transparency or communication, really there wasn't because parents weren't being listened to. So stakeholders were trying to voice their concerns, but they just weren't being listened to. There's also concerns about some of the trustees often didn't seem to know basic information, i.e. how many students in the music program would be affected. When questions were asked, they were often squashed. Some trustees wanted the budget process finished. Very few asked the hard questions. Another comment, suspension of elected officials that were voting in a way that I felt represented my concerns.
Right.
Cuts to programming that the local community had made very clear were important to them.
Yeah.
These are all really helpful comments.
Really helpful. So I think give people another 30 seconds or so, and then we can.
Maybe if you're still filling in your input, maybe wrap up your thoughts.
And then we can move on. We'll move on to a multiple choice question next about.
Here's another one coming in with respect to the vote on the sale of Lansdowne. A near majority of presenters at the special meeting objected to the sale on many levels. Then 2 trustees justified their yes vote by saying they had listened to the silent minority.
Yeah, some of the land sales have certainly been controversial. There's the land sale of lands down south. There's also the sale of property next to Vic High, which is going to be used for affordable housing. Those have certainly been issues over the last year or so. Should we shift?
Yeah, so we're going to close that one up and we're going to launch the next question. What were your core concerns with how the budget process unfolded in SD61 in 2022?
And if we've missed something there, please tell us in the chat. That's why we've included other. This is certainly not exhaustive. We're just volunteers here attempting to make sense of how people are feeling and try to give shape to the feedback. So please let us know if we're missing something. And you can vote for more than one thing. Not a zero-sum game. And James, for the Ministry of Education, yeah.
So
Where does that
lack
come
of
from?
transparency in the process seems to be the leader here. 73% were concerned about that, but very close behind, lack of public consultation.
These are some of the comments we're getting. Could some of these comments be shared with the Ministry of Education so they understand the issues we're facing? I think that's a great idea.
Mhm.
I think there shouldn't be a problem for us to roll up this feedback and share it with the ministry. Very interesting, though, that the number one answer is lack of transparency in the process, which I was not necessarily expecting, but that does make sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And if you have responded to other, feel free to further define that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. So we get a sense of where people are coming from. Haven't had too many comments on this one yet. So if you have a chance, what else has been challenging or problematic for you in this process?
I'm concerned that equity is being used to remove programs rather than to add them to schools.
Yes, and equity has a very particular meaning in the context of the school district.
Another comment, there's a legal precedent that says cuts can't be disproportionate to special education, but the budget, let's see, so hard to comprehend that I can't tell.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
it was confusing looking at a lot of the documents.
A note, and just noting that my lack of transparency response to the current question covers my issues with suspension of 2 trustees.
Right. Okay. That's an important bit of context there. Just going back to the poll, a lot of people are saying lack of transparency, at least one comment saying that would be inclusive of the suspension of trustees, and a
Makes
lack
sense.
of transparency of why and how that occurred, whether it's a valid suspension, what led to it, et cetera.
Okay. There's also apparent lack of concern by creating unconnected silos of trustees.
Mm-hmm. Give people maybe one more minute to chime in with any comments on their core concerns.
We've got another one coming in. The district meets with certain groups, but then completely misrepresents them at the budget meetings and even presents false information.
People are not feeling heard and their input is not being accurately represented is what I'm hearing. So we can shift now back to a question, another open-ended question. One about values this time, and starting to think ahead to the election in the fall and what we as a community want from school trustees moving forward. What's currently lacking and what do we want from our elected leaders moving ahead? I don't know if this question would pertain to administration, but at least to the elected school trustees. So please take a few minutes. How's everybody in the room doing, by the way? Everyone's so quiet. This is the quietest community meeting I've ever been to. And the idea, I know. You guys are doing a great job. The idea, of course, was to make this event fully hybrid so that the people who are not in the room feel as engaged as we do. The kind of the drawback is that it's kind of quiet in the room, but
It's kind of nice, actually.
So we've got some answers coming in terms of core values: honesty, transparency, transparent and engaged. Mostly, though, what we need as parents is choice in trustees, as there were only 11 candidates for 9 positions in the last election.
wow, I didn't realize that.
Another comment: to authentically care about the students and community and not put their own agenda ahead of the people they're representing. Integrity, consensus building, ability to properly listen. Honesty and humility, the willingness to stand up for students and do so in a way that is transparent and engaged with the community.
Another one on honesty and clear communication. Being as transparent as possible within the bounds of confidentiality, which is a good point. And when you can't answer, fully explaining why. That's a really important point, because there are confidentiality issues, but they were often not explained to us as a community. So we were sort of left in the dark.
Here's a good one. Respect for all individuals who may have a stake in SD61, including those in the community, Indigenous leaders, listening to parent and teacher voices. Commitment to serving the community and understanding the flexibility in approach to education and diversity in our schools are strengths that should be fostered, and minority groups should be embraced, not sidelined.
Excellent point.
Honesty and integrity.
So many comments.
So many comments coming in.
Students first. Currently, decisions don't seem to be made with students at the center. More chances to engage with trustees. Emails aren't responded to. That has definitely been the case with me. I think maybe of 15 or 20 emails I've sent to trustees, I've received 1 or 2 responses. I'm sure they get a lot of emails, but still.
Here's a good point. Someone who is a valid stakeholder in the district and the community it serves.
Yeah.
A trustee who will tirelessly campaign for increased funding from the ministry and fight to have music made a core subject again at all levels.
Yes.
I want the trustees to be informed and empathetic.
To understand that learning requires students to feel safe and seen in the school. So we need, lost their EAs.
Yeah, let's see.
So many comments
I
coming.
know they're flying in, so our screen's
we
moving.
need EAs and diverse programs and counselors. Yes. I would have to look back at the final budgetary decisions, but I believe counselors were they entirely cut or scaled back? Maybe someone in the room can.
2 youth and family counselors were cut.
Right.
But that was confusing to us because in the budget, Nicole Duncan had put forth a motion that passed that no youth and family counselors would be cut.
Right.
And so the district is saying that it was an administrative decision,
Okay.
which still doesn't help.
Right, so it's confusing and hard to really know what that detail in the budget is
Yeah.
representing.
Right.
But even as a stakeholder in the district, I would get clarification.
Yeah.
which is-
So for those online who might not have heard that comment, 2 counselor positions were cut, but there's some lack of transparency about why and how that occurred. More comments coming in.
Cooperative actions between all trustees, avoiding the apparent us versus them silos that have been created.
Mhm.
The unlawful removal of dissenting trustees in number of both open and where did it jump to? There's so many coming in now.
Where did that go? I lost that one.
We lost that one. All the comments that are coming in are bumping all the other ones down.
Yeah. Honesty and the ability really to listen, the ability to stand up to the admin and staff, respect for all, including the other trustees. Say it again.
There's anyone in the audience Q&A?
Another one, the real relationships with families that the youth and family counselors have will be so damaging to lose. Excellent point. It was particularly egregious to lose music and counseling during the pandemic. And I think for me, speaking personally as a parent here, that was some of the bitterest pills to swallow, given how music has been so essential for my daughters in getting through this very difficult time, playing their instruments with their mask on for 2 years, and having one of the few activities left in their lives that they could do was really important for their mental health.
So concern for families, putting the needs of children first, valuing the arts and music, a basic understanding of what equity means, a willing to push back against the senior administration.
Yes.
Students and teachers should be at the center of all decisions. I would like to see more transparency, less investigations and legal fees, integrity and honesty. Trustees should represent voters, not just be there to say yes to district staff. There's another comment in the chat. Really important that we seek candidates who are committed to mending and building a real relationship with local First Nations.
Thank you. Great point. Cooperative actions between all trustees. Oh yeah, we read that one. Ability to work together as a team and vote their conscience and not just toe the line. So this is a theme that I'm seeing emerging here that I hadn't really picked up on prior to this event, which is maybe at the very least a perceived unwillingness on the part of certain trustees to push back against administration or to push back against the government. And a couple of comments earlier alluded to the fact that some trustees are interested in seeking election as MLAs. And one of the comments was, I don't know if we read it, but was about potentially a conflict of interest. If you're interested in running as an MLA and sort of using the school board as a stepping stone, does that create a conflict of interest where you're not willing to push against the current government and demand the funding that our kids need because you're afraid of stepping on anyone's toes politically because you're thinking about your own career? So I'm maybe reading between the lines here a little bit, but I'm maybe picking up on at least a perceived conflict of interest. And a question from the floor.
I don't necessarily agree, because if you look at Carol James, who is a very prominent MLA that retired, she was our school board chair, and she fought against the same trustees there for funding in our school district.
Thank you for that point. Counterpoint here from the floor is that Carol James, who was an MLA, and prior to that was, I believe, the chair of the PAC at South Park. So she's been involved. She was involved at different levels, and was fighting for funding for kids. So it's not necessarily the case. But thank you for that point. So seeing some different points of view on that.
Really, it's about representing stakeholders, representing the parents and the students.
I think maybe, should we shift to the next question?
Yeah, I think we're going to launch the next question now. One proposed outcome of this visioning session is to create a questionnaire for future trustee candidates to clarify their views and positions. What kinds of questions would you want to appear on such a questionnaire? So in the election process, it would be very helpful to have this questionnaire that future trustee candidates would need to answer. So what kinds of information would you like to hear from them?
Yeah, it's a really good, I think it's a good question. And having run for city council in the last by-election and running in the election this year, I can tell you that these questionnaires exist for city council candidates. I mean, many different organizations, labor organizations, animal rights organizations, community organizations submit these kinds of questionnaires to candidates all the time. And the candidates fill them out and they say, here's my position on X, Y, and Z. Sometimes that information makes it online, but it's a way of enacting and requesting and requiring accountability from people. So you can say, a year or 2 years down the line, when an important vote comes up, you say, look, you've committed as a candidate to supporting this particular value or this particular cause. You need to put your money where your mouth is. And what I have witnessed in terms of the school trustees is that process and that accountability is lacking. It's not nearly the kind of accountability that you have for city council candidates, for MLAs, for MPs. So think about what are the questions you would want to ask.
Is there a way to send multiple responses to the same one for each question, or do you just have to make a list of all your questions?
Quick edit. It should be.
Thank you. Question from the floor is whether or not you can make multiple comments on a Slido question, or they all have to be in the same answer.
Edit.
And we're just looking into that.
Allow multiple answers.
Okay, so now we've launched multiple answers. So give that a try so you can fire off
Yeah.
everything that's hitting your brain all at once rather than having to.
Thank you for that excellent question from the floor.
Okay, we've got some answers, some responses coming in. Lots of them, actually. Trustees need to take the long view on all issues, including budgeting and cost,
Hear, hear.
especially important when dealing with replacement and retrofitting of buildings, and to a lesser extent, fleet vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, initial capital costs will be greater, but so will long-term cost savings. Linked closely to this is the need to meet SD61 greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Yeah.
Fortunately, both goals can be met by choosing more efficient emissions-free options like heat pumps. Yes. How does the candidate stand with regards to energy efficiency in the climate crisis? Good question.
I wish I'd written this one.
I know. Give examples of their actions to support the response. I like that, keeping their feet to the fire by giving examples. What are the most significant ways that SD61 can reduce its building operating costs and greenhouse gas emissions? Another comment. Another question for trustees. What has your connection to SD61 been up until now? And in parentheses, I want to know that they care about the kids. When the public is opposed to cuts proposed by the school district, what is the role of a trustee? What should a student in the public education experience as part of their education? What do you know about the K-12 funding model review and the recommendations that are already in the implementation phase?
Great question.
What is their motivation for running? What is their why? Good. I believe all actions, votes, advocacy, et cetera, should be able to be tied back to the why.
Yeah, I want to just go back to that very first comment for a minute and the question of long-term planning, right? Because this school district tends to get itself into these budgetary shortfalls, and they say, but part of being a good leader is foreseeing and forestalling those budgetary shortfalls via contingency planning. And I do think we really need to ask ourselves the question of why other school districts around here are not dealing with the same kind of budgetary issues that we are. What is partly what is unique?
It's tied to the funding model review.
The funding model review?
Yeah.
Thank you. Lots more comments coming in.
Okay, I would like to see a question that identified how trustees deal with conflict and opposing points of view.
Interesting.
When it comes to education of our children, people are passionate. Given that there will not always be consensus, I want to know, oh, wait, where did it go? I want to know that school board trustees are able to handle conflict with respect for opposing viewpoints. Such a good point. Respect is so important. Experience with budgets and financials.
Yeah, maybe that could be turned into a question, right?
What is your experience with budgets and financials?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's such a big part of the job.
Massive.
Have you ever put together a budget? Have you ever been on a finance committee? Do you have professional and community experience? I think that that's a fair question.
I do too. What is the first thing you will do when you become an SD61 trustee? Does your district have a seclusion and restraint policy? If yes, how long has it been in place, and does it represent current practice? Why is this important?
Seclusion and restraint policy. I don't know too much about that. That's an interesting one to look into.
Presumably, what is your position on the sale of school lands?
Yes.
Getting gas out of our schools, getting corporate influence out, i.e. Fortis.
Right. Fortis put together, I think, some kind of learning materials that were very controversial since they made.
did, and the VC PAC took that to the district and it was removed.
Right.
Okay,
right.
it was
Teachers
removed.
did have access to propaganda.
Yeah. How did that happen in the first place, though? Right.
That's the question that we asked. We didn't get a response, but we did have it removed from curriculum accessibility.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarifying comment from the floor about the Fortis learning materials where a complaint was made and it was eventually removed.
Do you want to take that one?
What is your vested interest in running for school board trustee? What experience or experiences do you have in our school district, school system? What are your priorities to advocate as a trustee? How are you going to advocate for these priorities? I think I would also maybe add into that something about conflict of interest. Do you have any conflicts of interest or
I think that's
perceived?
important to ask.
Uh,
Definitely.
I mean, the vested interest one is sort of about conflicts of interest, right?
What is their motivation for running? Are they a stakeholder themselves?
Right.
Define what equity means to them
Interesting.
in terms of marginalized communities, students with disabilities.
Where do you live? Yes, an important one. I believe a focus on example-based questions, i.e., what have you done to support X, Y, and Z in the past? Be specific, show your qualifications, can help to weed out the right answer. Oh, I see. Right. Rather than just giving what people feel is the correct answer.
Well, and forcing them to go into examples will
Mhm.
help to know whether people are just presenting themselves a certain way or if there's really content behind it. I want to know how trustees approach advocating for better provincial funding for public education. Many statistics show BC has one of the lowest per student funding rates in Canada.
I wonder if it would be legitimate and worthwhile to ask people for a CV too. They could potentially be.
Why not?
Why not?
See what their skill sets are.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here. Do you have children in the district?
Yeah, I do have some small concerns about that one though, because I don't know, it does potentially get into confidentiality issues. Like for instance, hiring committees are not supposed to ask about your marital status, whether you have kids or things like that.
Right, privacy.
But I don't know if that holds necessarily for a public vote. I mean, maybe that's something that people can weigh in on in the chat. Do you feel like I'm putting that out there to people right now. Do you think it's legitimate to ask people questions about things like whether or not they have kids or they have kids in the district? Are those valid questions to ask? Are those too personal? I'd be interested to hear what people have to say.
I mean, certainly that could be included by a candidate in the why they're running, if they do have children.
Yeah, let's make a poll for that real quick. Multiple choice. We're making a poll on the fly here. Is it valid to ask candidates about, let's say, their family status,
In the district.
whether
yeah.
they have kids, where they live, and other, let's say, personal questions?
You have to add the options. Other.
Not sure. Need to think about it. I feel like I'm working for the SAT here.
Just click launch if you want to watch it right now.
All right.
All right, we're just launching a quick new question.
Technology.
Woohoo. Is it valid to ask candidates about family status, whether they have kids, where they live, and other personal questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to think from the point of view of like city council campaigns. Certainly people get asked where they lived quite a bit because, I mean, as you know, it's a tradition in Canadian political culture that you don't have to live in the jurisdiction that you run in. That's the case for MLAs, for MPs, for city councilors. You can live in Saanich and run for city council in Victoria. You can live in North Saanich and run for MLA in Victoria. Like it's always been like that, but it's sort of controversial. And a lot of times voters want to know, am I voting for someone who lives in my jurisdiction? So I can say that does come up, the question of where people live.
There's a couple of good comments in the Q&A.
Some questions coming in here.
I think it's valid to ask if the candidates' kids were educated in the public system. That comment came in on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got another chat comment. I think that the question can be framed in terms of what is your personal connection to public education in SD61?
I like that. Maybe make it a little bit more open-ended. People have then the opportunity to weigh in and say, my kid was in the district, they graduated.
Yeah.
I don't have kids. Maybe my kid is in a school
Education
right
is
now.
important to me. Yeah. So reframing that question to be a little bit broader gives
Right.
candidates some leeway.
Yeah. And an opportunity to divulge, I guess, as much as they want to divulge.
And also this gets into the why. What's your personal
That's
connection
true.
will also feed into the potentially to why they're running. So results of the poll, 45% said yes, 10% no, 20% not sure, and 25% need to think about it.
Okay. I think that's fair. I mean, I'm also feel like I need to think about it as well.
Same.
Okay. So shifting now, well, we're going to make a new poll here. The question is, what are the highest priority questions to add to the questionnaire? And so I think we'll maybe just take a minute here and sort of interpret based upon the feedback, the highest priority questions to add to the questionnaire.
You can have it like a rated thing.
Oh.
So instead of multiple choice rating.
Okay, do a rating.
Can you have, oh, no, sorry, you're gonna have to do multiple choice. Sorry.
We're just setting up another question here.
So help me out here, Nancy. Connections to the school district,
Why are you running?
right? Why are you running?
What's your experience and background? There was also, what is your financial experience, budgets? What's your experience, competency with budgets? You can help us in the room too if there were other
questions of land sales.
Which was,
and land
what is your position on
swaps.
that?
Yeah, questions on equity. Positions on equity came up. Positions on and definition of equity.
There was also positions on greenhouse gas emissions, climate
Yeah, let's
change.
say climate and greenhouse gases.
Yes, there was, what is your position on in relations with Indigenous nations, Indigenous students?
Yeah, First Nations. There's a question on something on, not on schools of choice, but James, help me out here.
Mm-hmm.
They're on not specialized funding, but trying to think of what else there was.
There was also what is your conflict resolution style?
Right, conflict resolution.
You can always save and pop in and look at the other one.
I think let's do that.
Okay, let's just take a
There's
look.
also a question from the audience
Uh-huh.
or from the Q&A asking about if you can open up or leave comments on other polls from the past that have been closed.
Sure.
Please just feel free to leave comments in the chat and identify them for which question that they're coming from. And we'll be able to keep a record of all of this and relate them to those polls.
Yeah. So if you have anything that we haven't covered, you want to throw it in the chat, we'll definitely be reading through those and looking at those after the event is done as well.
And also, I should note here, there's a comment saying, just an aside, not all the budget cuts are in a situation of the ship has sailed, referring to a comment I made, which is a fair point. I know that the budgeting process is a long one, and there's like a number of filtering steps that occur. So maybe it's incorrect for me to say that that nothing can be done yet to affect next year's budget. So that point is well taken, even if it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing.
Here's another
today.
question that I think could be added. Who should set the rules governing board procedures, methods, and behavior, and who should enforce them?
Governing board procedure. Okay, so maybe going back to the poll. Is it this one here?
Can we launch it and then keep adding?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we should launch that
If you want
one.
to click, yeah,
Is it edit?
yeah, edit.
Okay, I'm just going to add those 2 points. So questions on governance and
Decision making.
decision making. And there was one other that I just slipped my mind about. The question of the suspensions of the trustees. You know, your position
On procedures for suspension.
Yeah.
I think it's all about, most of the complaints were about the procedures, the
That's
lack
right.
of transparency on that.
Scroll up before you launch.
Mhm.
Allow multiple.
multiple options.
Multiple options. Okay, so let's,
And yeah, I think
Is
it
that
should be
good?
Yeah.
okay, so
Okay.
let's launch that. And then if we can go back and see if there was another comment in the chat that I just wanted to.
Okay, that one's launched. And again, this is just our attempt to filter and and interpret all the mass amounts of information coming into us right now. So if we've missed something, please let us know and we can add it to the poll. Okay, to rank aspects of the school out of 5. Disambiguate aspects of education. Aspects of the school out of 5. I'm not sure I understand that one. Maybe somebody, whether you're in the room or online, maybe you can clarify that question. To rank aspects of the school out of 5.
Maybe their priorities, trying to get to their priorities.
Oh, okay.
There's another question coming in. In your own words, what are the current challenges facing our school board? So that also gets at priorities.
Yeah, good question. Okay.
Yeah, good question.
Starting to look at some of the polls here, responses.
Why are you running? What's your experience and background? What is your competency in budgets and financials? What is your position on and definition of equity? They're still moving up and down,
Yeah.
but those are some of the major ones. What's your connection to the school district?
And just to be clear, all of this anonymous input that we're getting will be archived in my Slido account here. So I'll have access to this because obviously we can't remember everything that's going on here. So it'll be a really good resource for us to come back to.
And to use as input to create the questionnaire for future candidates.
Yeah, particularly interested to know if we've missed anything because assuming we are going to make a questionnaire, we'll be coming back to this information. So please let us know if we have overlooked anything.
So why are you running is the leading question.
Questions on governance and decision-making is ranking pretty high. And that was really a theme throughout the day.
Yeah.
First Nations, climate.
Yes.
It sounds like a lot of these are questions that people find valuable.
Conflict, what's your conflict resolution style?
Yeah. Surprised that not as many people have voted on conflict of interest because that is one that comes up on city council questionnaires quite a bit. And of course, it's really important to be transparent about any potential conflicts that one might have. For instance, and kind of drawing a parallel with city council, councilors sometimes recuse themselves from votes because they have a conflict.
Of course.
This just happened in a vote last month around housing. I don't know if that happens that often. Maybe some of the people online or in the room can.
It does. So trustee Ann Whitaker works for Pacifica Housing.
Right.
So she would recuse herself if anything would come up regarding that, which it does.
I'm sure it gets complicated though, because if you have kids in the district, potentially anything is a conflict and you're not going to recuse yourself just because you have a child.
No, I think it depends on the motion on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what the vote would look like if she has any stake in it personally.
But that's potentially a good question for those online who maybe didn't hear. Ann Whitaker has a stake in Pacifica Housing and recused herself from a vote pertaining to housing. I think it'd be interesting to ask candidates if they have those kinds of stakes. Are they owners in a company?
Yeah.
Do they work for something? Is there any perceived conflict of interest that might affect their ability to serve? Or it might not affect their ability to serve, but just be transparent about it.
Just be transparent. Even if the question is, do you have any potential conflicts of interest?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so connections to the school district, 50%. Why are you running? The highest, second highest is your experience and background, competencies in budgets and financials. A lot of people listing that as well.
Great, these are really helpful.
Yeah, just gonna. Looks like everyone's voted, so we'll push pause on that one and maybe just go back to that question, the open-ended question. See if there's any new comments there on.
Okay, so this was the outcome of this visioning session is to create a questionnaire for future trustee candidates to clarify their views and positions.
Yeah.
So if you have any other thoughts on what kinds of questions would you want to appear on such a questionnaire, we will be using this as input going forward to help create a questionnaire.
Yeah, I just want to check back in with this line of questioning. There's been several new comments here.
Yeah, this is definitely. There's actually quite a few new comments. So let's see if we can figure out. Trustees should be able to demonstrate a progressive attitude towards reconciliation with First Nations.
Right.
Questions could be about a situation, and the trustee can answer how they would conduct themselves to demonstrate this.
Interesting.
Good comment. Maybe the 4 houses can provide input on this kind of question. Very good. I like that idea. What does DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging mean to you? What do you think the solution to increased aggression in classrooms is?
Yes. Good question. What kind of experience do you have working on boards? If you are elected, do you pledge to work to find concrete ways to improve graduation rates for students with disabilities? That's something that hasn't come up yet today. How will you do so? Who should set the rules governing board procedures, methods, behavior? We have heard comments on that, and that goes back to one of our.
So that just reinforces some of what we've already heard. To see if we've missed anything here. There's another one, something about their experience with Indigenous relations.
A number of questions.
How would you engage with First Nations authentically?
So thank you for all those comments, which we now have. We can archive and keep track of all these comments.
And we haven't necessarily had the chance to repeat everything, but we will be going through everything to try to create the questionnaire. So if you haven't heard your comment read out, we definitely still have it, and we'll be using it.
So we're coming actually to the end of this process, and we've, I think, solicited some fantastic information on the creation of a potential questionnaire. We've got at least 15 or 20 questions here that could be turned into a pretty comprehensive questionnaire, not just like yes or no type things, but situational questions where people might have to think about it and write a paragraph. And so assuming that we move forward with this idea of creating a questionnaire, really our final question for you today, unless we have one more question about things we might have overlooked, was about whether or not anyone who is involved in this visioning session might be interested in working with us over the next 6 months in actually bringing this questionnaire to fruition and creating potentially a website. And so we've asked the question here, do you have capacity to volunteer some of your time? Could you potentially help distribute the questionnaire, help create the questionnaire, right? Because, I mean, can we add a question to that?
Yeah.
And also if you're clicking that you can provide other support, would you be able to put it in the chat to define for us what you mean by other support? That would be very helpful. And if you, go ahead.
I actually have to go, but I do want to say that like we have been, I'm a stakeholder, and so the BC PAC has been talking all year about something just like this.
Great.
And so we would be thrilled to talk about that at our next meeting, and we would distribute it amongst all of the 20,000 students and their families.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Because what these people are saying today is actually what we've been hearing for a long time. It's not new.
Please help connect us if you can.
And yeah, I'll reach out to you. I mean,
great.
I do have to go, but like I will reach out to you, and I want to thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
At first, I had my reservations as why. You're running for city council, and you want to keep those separate. Trustees and city council. Separate there.
Yeah.
But we have a disaster in the district, so having everybody be able to contribute their concerns and their thoughts, they all seem to be the same, don't they?
There's a lot of consistency in what we're hearing. Yeah.
So I have to go. I've got a kid.
Thank you.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate it. So we'll have to figure out exactly what our process is in creating this questionnaire, because we have quite a lot of information now that we'll have to filter through, and some decisions will be made. But maybe we can create an ad hoc group.
So we've got some comments coming in. I have experience developing questions to evaluate candidates. Oh, that sounds very appropriate. And we'd be happy to help craft questions. That's great.
And here's an excellent one that I should respond to. Who would this question be coming from? Would it be a conflict of interest coming from a city councillor or a candidate? I think potentially yes. And just let me say clearly, I would be very happy if someone else could lead this process. I do not want to actually lead this process. I am involved in this community visioning session because my daughters were affected. So this is not connected to my own campaign, but I do think it's a totally valid question. I would love it, please, if you have capacity over the next few months, especially let's say over the next 2 or 3 months, I would be more than happy to just send out all of this archived input to maybe a small group, an ad hoc group, who can create the questionnaire and then connect with the VC pack.
And there's another one. Someone's commenting here. I'm happy to help coordinate distribution. That is great. Let's make sure. So if you're volunteering, please make sure that you get your contact details to Jeremy.
Yeah. Maybe I could put my email in here somewhere.
Yeah, that would be great. There's also,
Right
besides the questionnaire, it's essential that more candidates run. How can we work to ensure that there are enough candidates that we have a real choice?
Yes, that was going to be part of this session that kind of a little bit fell by the wayside, but maybe I just want to put it out there for people to comment as we kind of bring this to a close in the chat here, though, is should we as a sort of community nonpartisan group here be encouraging more people to run? And if so, how? How do we do that? I mean, it's one thing to say that we're going to do that, but how would that actually occur? I don't know if I have the answer to that, but I want to just put that out there to the community.
There's another comment. I don't know what your needs are yet, but happy to support a group with a plan. That's great. If you can please provide Jeremy with your contact details. And he's just putting his email.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to hand this off to people who are really keen to do it, because I don't really have the capacity. I want to help to the extent that I'm able to, but I would love to find someone who is able to help create the questionnaire, get it distributed,
And
then
a group of people, ideally.
and we could just create a really
Yeah.
basic website. It doesn't have to be fancy, but in the run up to the election, tens of thousands of people will go to this website and see, who am I voting for? And in fact, it'd be really nice to have a photograph, a headshot of the candidates. Like here's a candidate, here's their CV, here's how they answered these questions that were created by the community, so that voters can actually know what they're voting
Here's their
for.
top 5 priorities. Here's their experience.
Just like you have for other kinds of elected officials. I mean, when I voted in the past for trustees, I barely know who or what I'm voting for.
Now, there's also in the poll, I'm noticing that some people have said they can help us create the final questionnaire. That's great. Once again, just make sure that Jeremy
Reach out.
Reach out to Jeremy with your contact details and your name.
And if a lot of people have clicked other support, give us a hint in the chat of what that might look like. Give people maybe another minute to do that.
What's this one?
I could see if a speaker I know can do an online presentation they have done before on running for trustee, if that's appealing. That sounds like a great idea.
That sounds really interesting.
To get candidates to run,
sorry, there's just a question from the floor about that last comment in the chat. I could see if a speaker I know can do an online presentation they've done before on running for trustee, which might help, to make other people feel comfortable that they could run for trustee. So that presentation sounds like a good way to get more people to run.
Yeah, it is a daunting thing to run for office, and I think it is a barrier for a lot of people, because it's like, where do you even start? To get candidates to run, you need to offer them your support as a volunteer, i.e. a campaign manager, financial manager, door knocking, design for that. Yes, I mean, I don't have the capacity to do that, but hopefully some people out there do. But yeah, running for office is no joke. It's time, it's money, it's effort.
Yeah.
In terms of the comment about offering support to trustees, this might be easier if there's a slate. I know slates are often debated. Do we want slates at the city council level? Do we want them at the school trustee level? I'm putting it out there to the community. You can let us know what you think about that idea. There's certainly pros and cons. My own personal experience is that a lot of people in Victoria don't like the idea of a slate. It starts to feel too political, but then other people feel like it can simplify, for busy voters who don't have the time to figure out exactly everyone's positions, just to tell me what the slate is that roughly supports my values. So I can see both sides of that one. So maybe people can answer that.
Here's another comment. Don't forget paper mailouts or an article in the Saanich Victoria News. The bulk of voters don't tend to be older, and many don't go online. So it's actually a really good point that it can't just be digital.
So I think the only question I have left for people is did
we miss anything?
Did we miss anything? What are next steps? Any input or feedback for us? Please let us know. So maybe just just in the chat there for the next 3 or 4 minutes. Please let us know what you see as the next steps here now that we've had this first visioning session.
And was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to have covered?
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot to this issue, so I'm sure we've overlooked some things.
So we've got a few more comments coming in. Will a slate result in another block of 5? So still back on that one. And another one, so hard to run as an individual, though. Collective support is important. If they can clearly articulate their values, that's helpful to voters. School trustees elections seem to take a back seat at municipal election time.
Yep.
How can we make it appear as important as filling potholes in the roads? That's a really good comment.
I mean, that is kind of where the genesis of this entire visioning session is that these are publicly elected officials, and where we find ourselves in a situation where the community is pretty unhappy. What do we do with that? How do we transform that into positive action? How do we get accountability? How do we get maybe better leadership? And so
and to create visibility on the position in itself and the importance of the electoral process.
I know for a fact that, because I've asked my friends a lot of times when they go to vote, because a lot of times it's the same election for city council and trustees, they just end up not voting for the trustees because they don't know.
Right.
I mean, unless you have a kid in the district, you're probably not really following along. So the idea here is to vastly increase transparency and interest so that the electorate takes us more seriously, so that we don't get ourselves into these situations where voters are so unhappy.
Yeah, clearly it's very important. So we just need to communicate and articulate that.
Yeah. So please, any final questions, and then we can bring this to a close.
Awareness of candidates versus awareness of the importance of the vote more generally might be two different pieces of work.
Yeah, that's
true.
That's fair, but I think they might end up going hand in hand. If people feel more empowered and informed, I mean, for instance, if we make this website and this website is up online by September, the Times columnists will cover it, the Capital Daily will cover it,
true.
Big News, and voters will go, oh, okay, there's a website. I can go see who I'm voting for, which in the past, to my knowledge, has not existed at all. And so, I mean, I certainly never have seen that as a voter.
I mean, I think it's just about strengthening the democratic process here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another comment coming in, this is why a slate would be useful. Individual flyers, etc., are difficult to parse for voters with no vested interest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the argument in favor of slates, but I guess ultimately it's going to come down to the candidates themselves. I mean, they're free to create a slate or not. I mean, ourselves as the community nonpartisan, volunteers here, I don't feel like it's our place to tell people that, but people certainly have the freedom to do that if they want to.
There's another comment here. Let's see. I hope someone is willing to lead. I'm a great support person. That's wonderful. Make sure to contact Jeremy with your details. Another comment, let people know that trustees have a huge budget of over $250,000, which is our taxpayer dollars, and we need accountability.
Hear, hear.
Very important.
And some thank yous. Thank you for organizing this session. So important to think about what positive steps we can take to move things forward in our district. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for participating. And I think maybe just in drawing to a close, I want to thank Nancy for her time and for facilitating. I want to thank all the people in the room. I want to thank all the people who have joined us on YouTube. This event will be, we'll keep it up on YouTube, right? So if people, I'll post this on social media. Some people, no doubt, will have a chance to view this in the next few days and maybe take an hour of their time and see what the community thought about these issues. I want to thank James McKenzie as well for the IT help. And thank you all. And thank you to the people who have offered to volunteer some time or some experience or some support in making this questionnaire and this website a reality. And thank you for all for the kind comments here. We appreciate it.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you for participating online and in person.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll end the stream now. Thanks, everybody. Want to click end, right?
Yeah, end.